My name is Chloe. I am 28 years old, and my heart completely stopped beating when I looked through the crack of the kitchen door and saw my wealthy mother-in-law, Eleanor, a woman of 58 years, casually tossing the gift I spent 3 months making by hand straight into the trash can. We were at her massive holiday party, surrounded by people wearing clothes that cost more than my entire life savings, and I had just slipped away from the loud music to get a glass of water. That is exactly when I saw her standing near the pantry, holding the beautiful, hand-carved mahogany box I had poured my absolute soul into. She held it with 2 fingers, her face twisted in disgust as if she was holding a dirty rag, rolled her eyes while whispering something to her rich friends, and dropped it right into the garbage bin without a single second thought. A freezing cold wave of pure humiliation washed over my entire body. My hands started shaking uncontrollably, and hot tears stung my eyes as I realized all my late nights, all my bleeding fingers, and all my genuine love meant absolutely nothing to her. But she made a huge mistake that night because she had no idea that someone else in that house was watching her do it, and that single moment of cruelty was about to completely unravel her perfect little world. Before I tell you how this whole nightmare unfolded and how her own husband reacted to what she did, I want to take a quick pause and ask you guys a question. I always love knowing who is listening to my stories and from where you are tuning in, so please drop a comment below telling me what city and state you are in right now. It really helps me feel connected to you all and makes this feel like a real conversation. Now, to truly understand how I ended up standing in that marble kitchen feeling like absolute garbage, we need to go back a few years to when I first met my husband, Mark, who is 30 years old, and how his family completely turned my simple life upside down. Mark and I come from 2 completely different worlds. I grew up in a modest home where we counted every penny. My parents taught me that value comes from love, not a price tag. I work as a vintage furniture restorer, coming home covered in sawdust, but I absolutely love giving broken things a second chance. Mark, on the other hand, grew up with a silver spoon. He is a corporate lawyer whose childhood was filled with country clubs. We met by chance when he dropped his wallet, and I ran in the rain to return it. From our first dinner, we just clicked. He never made me feel small because I didn't have a fancy job. But as our relationship got serious, meeting his parents crashed our fairy tale straight into a brick wall. At the first dinner at their massive estate, Mark's father, Richard, a kind man of 60 years, was very welcoming. But Eleanor, his mother, looked at me like a stray dog. I had altered a thrift store dress, but under her gaze, I felt like I was wearing rags. She spent the dinner subtly insulting my background, making sure I knew I didn't belong. I cried the entire drive home. Over the next 2 years, we got married privately. Eleanor refused to help because it wasn't at her country club, and she showed up wearing a black funeral dress. It hurt deeply, but I swallowed my pride because I loved Mark, hoping kindness would eventually win her over. I spent countless afternoons crying to my best friend Sarah, who was 28 years old and a tough nurse. Sarah would say, "Chloe, people like her only understand price tags. You are wasting your energy trying to please a woman whose heart is made of cash." But I was stubbornly optimistic. That brings us to Eleanor's lavish 58th birthday party. The pressure was crushing. Her friends were buying diamond necklaces and designer bags. Mark and I had just bought our first small house, and money was extremely tight. I felt so inadequate, lying awake at night wondering how I could possibly compete with people who could buy her anything in the world. Then the idea hit me. I couldn't give her something expensive, but I could give her something priceless. Using my woodworking skills, I decided to make her a custom memory box. I spent my month's savings on rare curly maple wood. My plan was to build a flawless box, and on the inside of the lid, inlay a restored photo of Eleanor's deceased mother. Mark had mentioned she kept it hidden because it was torn and faded. I secretly borrowed it, and my heart broke seeing the genuine joy in young Eleanor's eyes, a stark contrast to her coldness now. I believed this gift would finally bridge the gap between us. For 3 months, I worked endlessly. Every evening after my restoration job, I headed to the garage, measuring, cutting, and sanding until my fingers bled. I used tiny brushes to restore and colorize that precious photo, sealing it into the box's lid. When I showed the finished piece to Sarah, she cried. "Chloe, this is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen," she said. "If she doesn't love this, she doesn't have a soul." Still, Sarah warned me to guard my heart. I wrapped the box in simple brown paper and a silk ribbon, feeling the heavy weight of my desperate hope for acceptance. The night of the party, Eleanor's mansion looked like a luxury magazine cover, complete with ice sculptures and caviar. I felt entirely out of place in my simple black dress, clutching my brown-wrapped box while surrounded by shiny designer gift bags. When it was time to open presents, Eleanor sat in a massive armchair like a queen. She feigned surprise at luxury watches, loudly announcing brand names as the room applauded. Finally, she reached the bottom of the pile and picked up my humble box. A heavy silence fell as she looked at the plain paper, not even hiding her disappointment. She slowly untied the ribbon, her perfectly manicured nails picking at the paper like it was diseased. When she opened the box, she didn't even look at the inside of the lid where the photo was. She just stared at the empty, velvet-lined interior of the wooden box. She looked up at me, her eyes cold and entirely empty. "Oh, a wooden box. How quaint," she said, her voice dripping with venomous sarcasm. "I suppose it is exactly what I should have expected from a carpenter." The entire room erupted into low, mocking laughter. My face burned so hot I felt like I was standing in a fire. I grabbed Mark's arm and shook my head. I didn't want to make a scene. Eleanor quickly handed the box to a passing maid and loudly asked for the next gift, completely dismissing my months of hard work in a matter of seconds. I felt numb. I felt like a massive idiot. Sarah had been right all along. You cannot buy love from someone who only values money. I told Mark I needed some air and practically ran out of the living room. I wandered through the massive hallways of the mansion, trying to find a quiet place to cry. I ended up near the large catering kitchen in the back of the house. The door was slightly open, and that is when I saw her. This brings us back to that horrible moment I described at the beginning. I stood frozen in the hallway, looking through the crack in the door. Eleanor was standing by the large industrial trash cans. The maid must have left the box on a counter, and Eleanor had picked it up. She didn't look at it. She didn't open it again. She just held it with absolute disgust, rolled her eyes, and tossed it straight into the garbage. It hit the bottom of the bin with a loud, hollow thud that echoed in my chest. She was throwing away my effort, my olive branch, and my absolute desperation to be part of her family. She was throwing me away. I couldn't breathe. I backed away from the door, my vision completely blurred by tears. I ran to the nearest bathroom, locked the door, and collapsed onto the cold tile floor. I sobbed until my ribs ached. Every single insecurity I had ever felt about my background, my job, and my worth came crashing down on me at once. I felt dirty, cheap, and utterly worthless. After about 20 minutes, I splashed cold water on my face, forced a fake smile, and went to find Mark. I told him I had a terrible migraine and needed to go home immediately. We left without saying goodbye to his mother. I didn't speak a single word the entire drive home. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had a massive hangover. My eyes were swollen and my heart was incredibly heavy. Mark had already left for the law firm, leaving a sweet note on the nightstand. I dragged myself out of bed, put on my old overalls, and prepared to go to the workshop. I just wanted to lose myself in sanding and staining old furniture where things actually made sense. But just as I was grabbing my keys, there was a loud knock on the front door. I wasn't expecting anyone, certainly not Sarah, who was working a double shift at the hospital. I opened the door and my heart dropped straight into my stomach. Standing on my small porch was Richard, my father-in-law. His face looked incredibly tired and his eyes were red, as if he hadn't slept at all. But what truly made my breath catch in my throat was what he was holding in his hands. He was clutching my wooden box. It had a small smudge of cake frosting on the side from the trash can, but it was intact. I immediately felt a surge of panic and humiliation. Had he brought it back to reject it officially? Was he going to tell me not to give them trash? Before I could even form a word, Richard took a deep breath, his voice trembling. "Chloe, may I please come in?" he asked softly. I nodded silently and stepped aside, gesturing for him to enter our small living room. He walked in, looking around at our modest furniture, and then he sat down on the sofa, placing the box gently on the coffee table, as if it were made of fragile glass. He looked up at me, and to my absolute shock, I saw tears pooling in his eyes. This strong, stoic, wealthy man was sitting in my living room, crying. "I saw what she did," Richard whispered, his voice cracking. "I was walking to the cellar and saw Eleanor throw your gift into the trash. I am so sorry, Chloe. After everyone left, I dug it out myself. I stood frozen, embarrassed, whispering that I shouldn't have embarrassed her. Richard stood up, shaking his head. No, Chloe, do not apologize for having a beautiful heart. He opened the box and gently touched the restored photo. When I looked inside, it broke me. Eleanor wasn't always like this. When we met 35 years ago, we had nothing. She used to understand the beauty of simplicity. He looked at the photo, his finger gently tracing the image of his wife as a happy little girl. As my business grew and we made more money, the money slowly changed her. It became an obsession. The social status, the brands, it consumed the woman I fell in love with. I allowed it to happen because I was too busy working. But seeing her throw away a piece of pure, genuine love that you spent months crafting with your own bare hands, it woke me up. It disgusted me, Chloe. It truly disgusted me. I started crying then. I couldn't hold it back anymore. All the tension, the pain, and the rejection poured out of me. Richard stepped forward and gave me a tight fatherly hug. It was the first time anyone in that family, besides Mark, had shown me genuine affection. You are the best thing that has ever happened to my son, Richard said formally. You have a pure soul. You understand what truly matters in this world, and I am not going to let my wife disrespect you ever again. I am putting an end to this today. That evening, Richard called for a family meeting at their mansion. He insisted that Mark and I be there. I was terrified, but Mark held my hand tightly, having learned exactly what his mother did from his father. Mark was absolutely furious. When we walked into the grand living room, Eleanor was sitting there, looking annoyed and impatient. She was wearing a silk robe and drinking a glass of expensive wine. What is the meaning of this dramatic gathering, Richard? I have a spa appointment in an hour, she complained, glaring at me and Mark. Richard didn't say a word at first. He just walked over to the grand mahogany coffee table and slammed my handmade wooden box down right in front of her. The loud crack echoed through the massive room. Eleanor jumped, spilling a few drops of her wine. She looked at the box, recognizing it instantly, and a flash of guilt, followed quickly by defensiveness, crossed her face. "Where did you get that?" she snapped. "I threw that piece of junk out. It was insulting. A cheap wooden box for my birthday? It was a slap in the face." Mark stepped forward, his voice trembling with a rage I had never seen in him before. "That piece of junk, Mother, took my wife 3 months of hard labor to build. She bled for that box. She poured her heart into it because she wanted to give you something meaningful. But you are so incredibly blind and corrupted by your own wealth that you couldn't even bother to open it properly and look inside." Eleanor scoffed, crossing her arms defensively. "Oh, please, what could possibly be inside a carpenter's box that would interest me?" Richard leaned over, his face inches from hers, and flipped the lid open. He pointed a shaking finger at the restored photograph of Eleanor and her deceased mother. "Look at it, Eleanor. Really look at it," he roared. His voice was so loud and commanding that Eleanor physically shrank back into her chair. Her eyes finally fell on the photograph. For a few seconds, there was absolute silence in the room. I watched as her cold, arrogant expression slowly started to crack. Her breath hitched, and her hand slowly reached up to cover her mouth. "She spent weeks restoring this for you," Richard said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. "Because she thought you still had a heart. But I see now that the woman I married is completely gone. You have become a shallow, cruel, and pathetic snob. You threw away the only genuine gift you received last night, while you paraded around with useless diamonds bought by people who don't even actually like you." Eleanor started to cry. Real, genuine tears streamed down her perfectly powdered face. She reached out to touch the photo. But Richard pulled the backs away before she could touch it. "No," he said firmly, "you don't deserve this. Not yet. Until you remember where you came from, and until you learn how to treat the people who genuinely care about you with basic human respect, you are completely cut off." Eleanor looked up in absolute shock. "Cut off? What do you mean, Richard?" Richard stood tall, looking at her with cold determination. "I am freezing your discretionary accounts. No more country club lunches, no more designer bags. You will live on a basic allowance." Eleanor was hysterical. She begged, she pleaded, she tried to apologize to me, but it was too late. The damage was done, and her husband was entirely serious. Mark and I left the mansion that night feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and profound relief. Mark hugged me so tight in the driveway, apologizing repeatedly for not protecting me better, but I told him it wasn't his fault. We had faced the monster together, and the truth had finally come to light. We drove back to our small, simple house, feeling free. It has been 2 years since that explosive night. Richard kept his word. He severely restricted Eleanor's access to their wealth, forcing her to step down from her high society boards and cancel her luxury trips. The humiliation she faced in her social circle was brutal, but it was exactly the harsh reality check she needed. Slowly, painfully, she had to learn how to exist without using money as a weapon. She started going to therapy, forced by Richard, to deal with her deep-seated insecurities. The outright cruelty has completely stopped. As for Richard, he became a constant presence in our lives. He visits my workshop often, bringing me old pieces of furniture he finds at flea markets, and we spend hours restoring them together. He kept the memory box on his own desk in his study, refusing to give it to Eleanor until he feels she has truly earned it. Mark and I welcomed our first child, a beautiful baby girl, 6 months ago. We named her after Sarah, my best friend. We are raising our daughter in our simple, modest home, surrounded by love and handmade furniture. Looking back on all of this, I learned a very hard but valuable lesson. You can never force someone to appreciate the beauty of simplicity if their soul is entirely corrupted by superficial things. Your value does not decrease just because someone is unable to see your worth. I poured my heart into a piece of wood, and while it was treated like trash by one person, it ended up revealing the truth and saving my family from a lifetime of toxic abuse. Now, I want to ask you all a question. If you were in my shoes, would you have ever forgiven Eleanor? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until the next story.